Today, I would like to take you on a journey that takes us from the green hills of Ireland to the grand halls of Oxford University, all the way to a little wardrobe in a spare room. This journey is the story of an incredible man named Clive Staples Lewis, or Jack, as his friends and family knew him. Since I was a young child, the fantastical stories of Lewis have captured my heart, and I've written many papers on his life since that time. C.S. Lewis's life is a product of the events that shaped him in his childhood, education, conversion, and marriage. And his life and writings are anything but ordinary. Even from childhood, Lewis's imagination ran wild. According to A.N. Wilson's C.S. Lewis, a biography, he was born on November 29, 1898. His father, Albert, was a lawyer, and his mother, Flora, was the daughter of a vicar. As a child, Lewis was enraptured with the stories of Beatrix Potter. The human qualities of the animals in such stories as Peter Rabbit fired the young boy's imagination. In C.S. Lewis, The Man Behind Narnia, Beatrice Gormley recalls how Jack soon developed his own imaginary world alongside his brother Warren, a land they called Boxen. Boxen was a magical land full of talking animals, and the Lewis brothers even took it upon themselves to record its history. At age 12, as Alan Jacobs notes in The Narnian Life and Imagination of C.S. Lewis, Lewis flourished under the tutelage of Lewis Alden, who gave him a greater appreciation for some of the writings that would influence him later in his life. Lewis earned his degree from Oxford University, where many significant events would take place that would significantly affect his thinking and style. After joining an English literature course, Gormley quotes Lewis as saying that he had the shock of discovering that Neville Coghill, clearly the most intelligent and best informed man in the class, was a Christian. Lewis's study in philosophy led him to believe in a greater impersonal force, which he referred to as the absolute. Even the literature that C.S. Lewis read at this time was imbued with the essence of the Christian faith. One of the authors that he took a great interest in at this time was the conservative Christian firebrand G.K. Chesterton, whose fiction and arguments in favor of Christianity shook Lewis's militant atheism. According to Jacobs, Lewis wrote, "Most alarming of all was George Herbert. Here was a man who seemed to me to excel all other authors I ever read in conveying the quality of life as we actually live it. But the wretched fellow insisted on mediating it through what I still would have called the Christian mythology." After many years of atheism, Lewis came to a faith that would change the course of his life. In 1929, Lewis admitted that he fell to his knees and prayed, now convinced that God was not impersonal, but was a real living person. A few years earlier, on May 11, 1926, Lewis had met J.R.R. Tolkien at a faculty meeting in Oxford University. This friendship would prove more influential to Lewis's life than any other. Gormley describes an evening walk that took place in 1931 in which Lewis, Tolkien, and English professor Hugo Dyson had a long discussion that greatly relieved some of Lewis's discomfort with the more mystical aspects of Christian teaching. Shortly after this conversation, Lewis came to accept Jesus Christ as his Lord and Savior, writing to a friend that he came to believe in Christianity as a true myth, a myth working on us in the same way as the others, but it really happened. His newfound faith motivated the creation of some of his most famous works. One of the first fictional works to emerge from this era was Out of the Silent Planet, which featured Christian themes and allegories. Perhaps his most well-known work, The Lion, the Witch, and the Wardrobe, was published in 1950. The book symbolized Christ's death and resurrection in a fantasy setting. As Gormley writes, his faith both released him and inspired him to write his best. Alan Jacobs agrees, writing that once he admitted that God was God, it is as though the key to his own hidden and locked away personality was given to him. After all these successes later in his life, C.S. Lewis married Joy Gresham, an American woman. As Wilson notes, it was Joy who began correspondence with Lewis, which initially consisted of discussion over different topics. But by 1957, the two had suddenly married, taking Lewis's friends by surprise. However, shortly before their marriage, Joy was diagnosed with breast cancer and died soon after in 1960. The devastation that Lewis encountered after his wife's death inspired his book, A Grief Observed, which was a drastic departure from his typically level-headed style. Lewis himself died in 1963. Gormley describes how he found out shortly after his wife's death that his kidneys were failing. He died in his home on November 22, 1963, which is the same day that John F. Kennedy was assassinated. Wilson notes that because it coincided with such a momentous event, the press only covered his death lightly, and so passed the literary giant. In sum, C.S. Lewis would not be the man we know him as today if not for his extraordinary and at times challenging childhood, education, conversion, and marriage. Though tragic at times, Lewis's incredible life demonstrated the inspiration he found in leaning on his God. Who knows what we might achieve if we follow his lead?